I know that there's good gold down there, but we got 100 ounces right here. And we got another 200 ounces right here.
Jesus.
Yeah, we had a rough week. Had some downtime at the plant, but I was able to scrape up to 50 ounces.
Early that morning, the atmosphere at Rick Ness's camp was strange. The machines were down, people were looking at each other, and a silence hung in the air, palpable. No one knew exactly what had happened. All that was spread was that Rick has been removed from the site. Such a drastic decision. And all of a sudden, the entire team was racking their brains with just one question: why? Over the past few weeks, Rick's production had dropped by nearly 40%, expenses were rising, and 2 machines were constantly breaking down. Yet no one imagined it would come to this. The tension was palpable on the crew's faces, as if something major was about to happen. And then, without any warning, dust billowed in the distance. Parker Schnabel was arriving on site, calm, confident, with the air of a boss. With 2 survey trucks, 3 new crew members, and a sealed folder in hand. Rick's entire team froze. What was going to happen? Insiders say the land is estimated to contain high-grade gold worth approximately $4.5 million, approximately 38 crore. No one would miss a chance at such a value. Rick's sudden departure and Parker's arrival at the same time seemed like no coincidence. It seemed like Gold Rush's biggest power shift was just beginning. And listen carefully, brother. If you don't subscribe, you'll never know half of Gold Rush's real story. What's about to happen next will shake up the entire season. Video starts. Hold on tight to the suspense. News of Rick Ness's removal spreads. As the crew arrived at the site in the morning, they noticed a different atmosphere. Everyone quietly asked each other what had happened the night before. Rick's truck wasn't parked in its usual spot, and his cabin lights were off. This startled everyone, as Rick was often one of the first to arrive at the site. Anxiety was evident on people's faces, as if someone had changed their entire world without warning. A short while later, a worker whispered, "I've heard Rick has been removed from the site." This alone sent a wave of anxiety through the crew. Crew members looked at each other as if seeking confirmation, but no one had any concrete information. There was only fear, uncertainty, and a nagging question. Was Rick really banned? Or was this just a misunderstanding? But the faster the news spread, the more intense the atmosphere became. No one had official confirmation yet, which was why everyone was in guessing mode. Some were saying that officials had arrived last night. Others were saying that Rick had been caught in a major mistake. Others remained silent, finding it hard to believe that Rick, who had been mining for so many years, would suddenly be fired without any announcement. But as happens in mining camps, even the smallest rumor spreads like wildfire. The crew's tension was growing, as Rick's absence could directly mean a halt to operations, a disruption to schedules, and most importantly, their jobs. Some were discussing the possibility of Parker's arrival, while others were afraid that if the ban turned out to be true, the entire digging strategy would change. Everyone was wondering how a calm and stubborn miner like Rick could disappear without notice. The suspense was so intense that every heartbeat felt faster, and everyone was waiting for that one announcement that would reveal the truth and tell whether Rick would return now or it was really all over. Over the past few weeks, the atmosphere at Rick's camp had slowly begun to change. Initially, everyone thought it was just normal, seasonal pressure, but it soon became clear that the situation was worsening. Production suddenly dropped by almost 40%, and less gold was being extracted from the ground every day. The crew wondered what was going wrong, because the same machines, the same crew, the same claims. Yet output was steadily declining. Rick's face had also remained serious for the past few days, as if crushed under a heavy load. The biggest shock came when 2 large machines suddenly broke down. The hydraulic pump of one excavator burst, and the track system of the other began to jam repeatedly. The technician explained that these breakdowns were not a matter of a day or two, but were the result of several weeks of incorrect operations. The machines shutting down meant a direct halt to production. On top of that, fuel consumption had increased significantly beyond normal, putting double the pressure on the budget. Rick was trying to handle it all on his own, but the pressure was clearly visible in his behavior. Amidst all these technical problems, tensions began to rise within the crew. Ground mapping errors were discovered, angering many workers. Depth planning was proving inaccurate. Where gold was expected, only soil was being uncovered, and where digging should have been minimal, machines were unnecessarily digging deeper. The crew began to suspect that Rick's calculations were incorrect, and this could be the reason for the decline in production. There were instances when Rick provided a depth plan, but in the field, the estimate turned out to be completely different. Gradually, this tension began to develop into open arguments. Some night shift workers openly expressed that if digging continued in this manner, the claim losses would increase. Rick, who had always been calm, now became irritated by every small mistake. In team meetings, his voice became louder and more aggressive. The crew felt that Rick was taking all the responsibility upon himself, yet making decisions without discussion, which was increasing the gap and misunderstanding. One day, the situation became so dire that two senior operators directly told Rick, "The depth readings are wrong, and the machines are being damaged unnecessarily." Rick took this as a challenge and immediately had the map rechecked. But when the new survey arrived, it also showed the same mismatch as the crew. This was the point where trust between Rick and the team began to break down. The crew began to feel that Rick was making wrong decisions under pressure and ignoring the actual condition of the ground. Meanwhile, production further declined. Operators feared that if the digging continued to go wrong, a large portion of the claim would be lost. The massive fuel waste and constant maintenance lowered the morale of the camp. Rick became increasingly stressed trying to correct every mistake alone. The crew also began to feel that Rick was becoming distant from them, and many began to think that Rick was unable to handle such a large team. All this combined to create a dangerous atmosphere within the camp. Production drops, poor planning, mapping errors, machine damage, fuel waste. These weren't just mining problems. They were a fire that slowly spread through Rick and his entire crew, eventually leading to a point of no return. It was midday, and a heavy silence had already descended on Rick's camp. The crew was busy with their work, but everyone's minds were occupied with the same question. Where had Rick gone? Just then, a strange dust cloud was heard rising in the wind from a distance. At first, everyone thought a supply truck was approaching, but as the sound grew closer, the workers stopped one by one. The next moment, two large white trucks, followed by a familiar black pickup, entered the site, and in front, Parker Schnabel. The crew's eyes widened as if struck by lightning. Parker's entry is always different, calm, confident, and looking straight into the eyes. This time it was the same vibe, but a little more serious. Crew members began elbowing each other, asking, "Why is he here?" Parker got off the truck and, without hesitation, headed straight for the central pit. He had the same bossy gait he displays at his claim sites. The workers slowly followed him. Suddenly, a strange, tense atmosphere erupted on the site. Parker held a thick, sealed folder of paperwork. It was black in color, with an official seal on the top. This raised more questions in the crew's minds. Was he there for an inspection? Had Parker been given temporary control after Rick's ban? Or was a claim transfer really about to take place? No raid, audit, or inspection at such a large mining site goes without paperwork, and Parker's arrival with the file clearly indicated some legal or official gameplay. Whispers among the crew intensified. Some workers said they thought Parker had come for emergency support, as Rick hadn't had time to resolve issues related to the production decline, but many suspected the sealed paperwork might be related to a takeover. In the mining world, paperwork signifies either a major problem or a major decision. Some crew members said that perhaps upper management had called Parker to take over the entire site, as Parker is known for his efficiency and fast action. Parker himself wasn't in the mood to speak. He was carefully examining each machine, observing the depth lines and mapping marks in each pit area. The surveyors accompanying Parker were also moving around the site, taking ground readings. The crew was now almost certain this wasn't just a casual visit. Something serious was going on. The suspense had grown so intense that everyone couldn't concentrate on their work. After a while, Parker walked over to the central tent and placed the paperwork folder on the table. None of the crew dared to enter. Everyone watched from afar to see if Parker was about to open the file. But Parker kept the file closed, further increasing the confusion. His face wore an expression that suggested he knew all the answers, but didn't want to speak yet. The question now was, what were the official papers about? A claim violation? A mistake by Rick? A report of a production loss? A safety breach? Or an order giving Parker temporary charge of the site? No one had the answers. Every worker's heart was pounding, as if they were waiting for some big announcement. Parker's silent entry and the sealed paperwork in his hand shook the entire camp. The crew was now completely convinced that something would happen today that would change the course of the entire season. But the real reason, only Parker knew, and the documents hidden in that file. After Parker's arrival, the biggest question swirling around the site was, why is this land so important? The crew had heard before that high-grade pockets were expected in this claim, but no one had ever seen the exact data. But the numbers Parker's survey team came up with today stunned everyone. Old survey files were retrieved, and they clearly stated that this entire patch held high-grade gold potential worth approximately $4.5 million, or approximately R38 crore. This data wasn't just a rumor. It was based on actual ground depth readings, metal density scans, and small samples from previous seasons. When the crew realized that this very land was hiding such immense value, everyone's heart skipped a beat. Such a large sum makes any mining site a game changer. Old records show that small nuggets had been found on this same patch a few years earlier, but at that time the team didn't have the heavy machinery needed to extract deeper gold pockets. Now that Rick had the machines, they were repeatedly breaking down, causing production to plummet. The crew began to suspect that Rick had already foreseen the immense potential in the ground, but he was unable to handle the pressure. Meanwhile, a question lingered in everyone's minds. If there was so much gold in the ground, why was Rick removed? What forced him to leave the site? No one could understand how a stubborn and experienced miner like Rick could suddenly disappear without a word. The crew began discussing among themselves that there must be some serious reason behind his sudden ban. The first possibility that came to mind was a safety violation. Over the past few weeks, there had been complaints of machine malfunctions, incorrect depth mapping, and dangerous digging angles. If authorities determined the digging was unsafe, Rick could face an immediate penalty. Another major possibility was that Rick's permit had expired. If permit renewal paperwork isn't filed on time, mining is instantly halted. This is the mining industry's strictest rule. A third reason could have been financial trouble. Production had fallen by 40%, fuel costs had risen, and frequent breakdowns had almost doubled the budget. Rick was likely incurring losses, and his support system was weakened. If financial backup collapsed, the mining permit was automatically at risk. Some members of the crew also whispered that Rick might have delayed some payments, which could anger upper management. There was another more serious possibility, an internal complaint. In mining camps, small arguments can sometimes escalate into major issues. A worker might have declared the work unsafe or reported an internal conflict. This could lead to officials temporarily suspending Rick. The crew didn't know the truth, but the possibilities were so great that every worker was now afraid of the consequences for the entire team. All of these things pointed in one direction. Something so big was hidden in this land that even Rick's small decisions could become extremely costly. And perhaps this was why Parker was called here immediately. No mistakes are allowed on a $4.5 million property, and Rick's list of mistakes had been growing over the past month. Now all eyes were on that sealed paperwork, because it held the answer that could reveal the biggest secret of the day. Was Rick really banned, or was some other game being played to remove him? Around noon, another commotion erupted at the site. 3 white SUVs with official stickers were seen approaching from a distance. The crew's faces fell again. This was the same team that arrives at a mining site only when conditions are not normal. As soon as the SUVs stopped, 4 officials got out and headed straight for the central tent. They carried files, GPS devices, and a large rolled-up boundary map. Seeing this, everyone understood that the real investigation was about to begin. The officials first began checking the documents: permit papers, last month's production sheets, daily logs, and machine usage reports. They carefully studied each paper, making notes. The crew stood at a distance, watching, fearing that even a small mistake might lead to major trouble. Then the officials headed to the ground and began verifying the entire claim boundary with GPS. If even the slightest violation was found, mining could be immediately halted. Every marker, every stake, every depth reading, everything was being examined. The investigation didn't stop there. Officials began moving through the machines, excavators, dump trucks, the wash plant, and even fuel records. They had the broken machines opened, checked hydraulic levels, and questioned the operators about when and how the problems had started. The crew was careful in their answers, as even a wrong word could become part of the investigation. It was clear that the entire site was now under a microscope after Rick's absence. Meanwhile, Parker didn't sit idly by. As the officials worked, Parker took his first major step, a full machinery audit. He personally went to each machine, examining its parts, hydraulic lines, engine wear, track tension. He personally inspected every detail. The crew was stunned by his seriousness. Parker hadn't come just to observe. He had come to understand the site and perhaps take control. Within minutes, Parker noticed that 2 machines had been completely inadequately maintained. He immediately summoned the operators and questioned why the servicing delay had occurred. Operators reported that Rick had reduced servicing time to speed up production. Upon hearing this, Parker made an immediate decision. 2 operators were shifted to other spots, and 2 new operators were called in to handle the machines. The crew began to realize that if Parker took over, discipline would be very strict. Parker then took depth mapping sheets and went to the ground. He measured the ground angles himself with a laser tool and marked several spots with red marks. These were the spots where Rick had chosen the wrong digging direction. Parker calmly remarked that if the digging had continued like this, half of the claim would have been wasted without any gold being recovered. Silence fell over the crew, because what Parker was saying seemed absolutely true. Parker then checked the fuel usage logs and found that fuel loss in the previous weeks was about 30% higher than normal. This directly pointed to poor planning and incorrect depth mapping. He didn't immediately bring this up with the officials, but it was clear that Parker was taking note of everything and would be making decisions soon. Now 2 things were running parallel at the site: the officials' legal investigation and Parker's technical inspection. Both were pointing in the same direction. Something had gone terribly wrong during Rick's tenure. The crew's pulse was racing, feeling that today might be the moment when the real verdict would be delivered. Would mining stop, or would Parker save it? Seeing the condition of the site, Parker clearly understood that if the old methods continued, the land's potential would not be fully realized. So, as soon as the officials' initial inspection was complete, Parker called the crew into a small huddle and explained his new strategy, which he called the zero-loss mission. His voice was calm, but his words held such strength that the crew understood. Things would no longer be the same. Parker clearly stated that digging would no longer be simply a matter of digging, but rather every move would be based on data. First, Parker created a new digging schedule. Previously, the crew had been working long shifts of 10-12 hours, which caused overheating of the machines and fatigue of the operators. Parker changed this to short cycle shifts to increase efficiency and reduce breakdowns. He argued that long shifts did not speed up production. Instead, they increased defects. The crew found his argument completely logical, as this was precisely what had happened in the previous weeks. Following this, Parker implemented a proper mapping system. He sent his surveyors to the ground and conducted 3D surface readings. Then, putting aside Rick's old depth mapping, he created a new mapping, estimating each pocket based on data. Whereas Rick relied on guesswork, Parker confirmed everything with laser readings and metal density scans. For the first time, the crew felt that digging would no longer be based on luck, but on science. Fuel optimization was also a priority for Parker. Checking fuel logs, he discovered that approximately 30% of fuel had been wasted in the previous weeks. He established rules. Machines would not run on unnecessary warm-up, unnecessary idling would be prevented, and machines would only operate at the proper digging angle. The crew felt that only someone who paid attention to such small details could save production, because these things were often overlooked during Rick's time. Now comes the difference between Rick and Parker's methods, and this is where the real story begins to unfold. Rick always worked in a somewhat free-flowing style. His planning looked great on paper, but often resulted in mismatches on the ground. Depth mapping was inaccurate, Machines often went at the wrong angle, and digging didn't go according to the blueprint. Rick's nature was such that he listened less to others and made more decisions on his own. Many in the crew said that Rick was sometimes stubborn, even when the data contradicted him. In contrast, Parker's system was sharp and disciplined. He broke everything down into small parts and analyzed it. Machine health, operator performance, soil density, gold pockets, fuel ratio, everything. He told the crew that success in mining comes not from luck, but from discipline. The crew was also aware of this, because with Parker's arrival, a sense of order and clarity began to emerge on the site. Rick often dug in the wrong spots in his haste to complete the work. However, Parker laid down a clear rule. Don't dig even an inch wrong. Therefore, he placed several red marks on the ground, which helped the crew understand how many places Rick had dug incorrectly. Seeing this, many workers feared that if the digging continued like this, a large portion of the claim could be wasted. Parker's strategy brought a new energy to the site. The crew felt that the chances of extracting real gold from the ground had increased. Instead of Rick's messy planning, every step was calculated. Parker brought the entire team together, focused, disciplined, and in zero-mistake mode. The ground now looked more promising than ever, and there was a confidence in Parker's eyes, as if he already knew that something big was hidden beneath this ground. Seeing the condition of the site, Parker clearly understood that if the old methods continued, the land's potential would not be fully realized. So as soon as the officials' initial inspection was complete, Parker called the crew into a small huddle and explained his new strategy, which he called the zero-loss mission. His voice was calm, but his words held such strength that the crew understood. Things would no longer be the same. Parker clearly stated that digging would no longer be simply a matter of digging, but rather every move would be based on data. First, Parker created a new digging schedule. Previously, the crew had been working long shifts of 10 to 12 hours, which caused overheating of the machines and fatigue of the operators. Parker changed this to short-cycle shifts to increase efficiency and reduce breakdowns. He argued that long shifts did not speed up production. Instead, they increased defects. The crew found his argument completely logical, as this was precisely what had happened in the previous weeks. Following this, Parker implemented a proper mapping system. He sent his surveyors to the ground and conducted 3D surface readings. Then, putting aside Rick's old depth mapping, he created a new mapping, estimating each pocket based on data. Whereas Rick relied on guesswork, Parker confirmed everything with laser readings and metal density scans. For the first time, the crew felt that digging would no longer be based on luck, but on science. Fuel optimization was also a priority for Parker. Checking fuel logs, he discovered that approximately 30% of fuel had been wasted in the previous weeks. He established rules. Machines would not run on unnecessary warm-up. Unnecessary idling would be prevented, and machines would only operate at the proper digging angle. The crew felt that only someone who paid attention to such small details could save production, because these things were often overlooked during Rick's time. Now comes the difference between Rick and Parker's methods, and this is where the real story begins to unfold. Rick always worked in a somewhat free-flowing style. His planning looked great on paper, but often resulted in mismatches on the ground. Depth mapping was inaccurate, machines often went at the wrong angle, and digging didn't go according to the blueprint. Rick's nature was such that he listened less to others and made more decisions on his own. Many in the crew said that Rick was sometimes stubborn, even when the data contradicted him. In contrast, Parker's system was sharp and disciplined. He broke everything down into small parts and analyzed it. Machine health, operator performance, soil density, gold pockets, fuel ratio, everything. He told the crew that success in mining comes not from luck, but from discipline. The crew was also aware of this, because with Parker's arrival, a sense of order and clarity began to emerge on the site. Rick often dug in the wrong spots in his haste to complete the work. However, Parker laid down a clear rule. Don't dig even an inch wrong. Therefore, he placed several red marks on the ground, which helped the crew understand how many places Rick had dug incorrectly. Seeing this, many workers feared that if the digging continued like this, a large portion of the claim could be wasted. Parker's strategy brought a new energy to the site. The crew felt that the chances of extracting real gold from the ground had increased. Instead of Rick's messy planning, every step was calculated. Parker brought the entire team together, focused, disciplined, and in zero-mistake mode. The ground now looked more promising than ever, and there was a confidence in Parker's eyes, as if he already knew that something big was hidden beneath this ground. The news of Rick's departure and Parker's sudden takeover divided the entire camp. On one side were those who had been working with Rick for years, those who admired his calm nature, his leadership style, and his loyalty. Sadness and confusion were clearly visible on their faces. They felt that Rick had been unfairly removed, and Parker's sudden arrival didn't seem right. Many became emotional upon Rick's departure, having endured some tough seasons with him. On the other side were those in the camp, who had long been troubled by Rick's declining production and inaccurate planning. For them, Parker's arrival was a relief. They felt that with Parker in charge, digging would become smoother and more efficient. They had admired Parker's discipline, his sharp method, and his fast decision-making from the beginning. Some workers were even excited that perhaps they would now be able to access the $4.5 million gold pocket. Similarly, the camp was literally divided into two parts, loyalty versus opportunity. But the tension only increased when Parker finally decided to open the sealed folder, the very folder that had kept the entire site in suspense for hours. The crew slowly began gathering around the tent, all eyes fixed on that black folder. Parker opened the file with a calm face and began carefully reading the papers inside. His expression changed from serious to more worried. After a few minutes, he gathered the crew and told them that the file contained something extremely critical, something that could jeopardize not only Rick's job, but the safety of the entire crew. According to the file, Rick had detected a dangerous fault line a few weeks earlier, a deep underground crack where the ground was unstable. Very close to this fault line was a gold pocket estimated to be worth approximately $4.5 million. That meant there was gold, but right beneath it lay death. The fault line meant that if digging was done in the wrong place or at the wrong angle, the entire area could collapse. Machines could collapse, workers could be trapped, and in the worst-case scenario, the ground could even create a massive slide. The file clearly stated that Rick had seen this fault line scan 3 weeks earlier, but he didn't report it. Perhaps he wanted to take the risk due to pressure, financial loss, or a desire to save the season. This brought a deep silence to the camp. Rick's loyal team was in shock. They couldn't believe Rick could withhold such dangerous information. Meanwhile, some workers were angry because if this fault line had been disclosed earlier, breakdowns, fuel waste, and wrong digging decisions might have been avoided. The crew suddenly understood that Rick's ban wasn't just about production, it was also about safety and responsibility. Parker explained that if the digging had gone a few feet further at that spot, a mini collapse was almost guaranteed. Hearing this, many workers' faces turned pale. Rick's mistake was grave, perhaps too grave. Now, for the first time, both sides of the camp agreed on the same point. What was written in the file could have truly endangered everyone's lives. Parker calmly stated that if the site was to be kept safe and the gold retrieved, the entire digging plan would have to be carried out in a scientific manner from now on. Hearing this, the crew realized that the sealed folder didn't just expose Rick's mistake, it changed the course of the entire season. As soon as Parker understood everything in the sealed folder, he wasted no time implementing his new strategy. The machines were placed away from the fault line, and an alternate safe zone was chosen. The crew was tense, but Parker's confident voice steadied them. Digging resumed, but this time every movement was under complete control, without an inch of error. A few minutes later, the ground scanner gave its first beep. The crew thought it might be a shallow metal reading, but when Parker checked the device again, his eyes froze for a moment. The readings on the scanner suddenly intensified, and the depth meter showed a very heavy, very solid metallic object between 60 and 70 feet. The crew members looked at each other as if electricity was floating in the air. This was the very spot Rick had been afraid to dig near. The beeping was getting louder by the second. Parker, scanner in hand, stepped onto the ground and finally signaled the machines to stop. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the crew and said in a calm yet extremely serious tone, If Rick hid this too, then there's something much bigger down there. The entire camp fell into dead silence. No one had imagined that something even more shocking than the sealed folder would be found underground. Fear and excitement combined to create a strange tension on the crew's faces. Parker's eyes were glinting, as if he was convinced that this was where the season's real twist was about to begin. And brother, one thing is clear. If you haven't subscribed yet, you'll miss this biggest discovery of Gold Rush. The next part is so huge that it could change the entire season.